Okay, so looks like we are past our time certain of 2 p.m. So I am going to call this meeting to order as soon as I can find the agenda. Here we go. So we will call this Forest Trust Lands Advisory Committee meeting to order. Today is April 29th, time being 2:01 p.m. And I want to thank everyone for being here. I know we do have some people traveling, but I'm hoping they're all doing well and hopefully able to log on. So with that, let's start with some introductions before I do some opening comments. And can we have the, well, I'll tell you what, I will call on the board of directors from the various counties. So Tillamook County, Aaron Scar.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Aaron. From Clatsop County, Courtney Bangs.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Hi, Courtney. Thanks for being here. Position 3, which includes Clackamas County, Columbia County, and Washington County. We have Margaret Magruder from Columbia.
Good afternoon.
Hi, Margaret. How are you? Position 4, Benton County, Lincoln County, Lynn County, Marion County, Polk County. We have Will Tucker.
Hello there all.
Oh, hello.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Oh, yeah, there you are. I'm sorry. I was looking for you on the screen, Will. How are you?
Okay. All right. I'm good.
Perfect. Thank you. In position 5, Coos County, Douglas County, Josephine County, Klamath County, and Lane County. From Coos County, we should have Bob Main. And I know Bob was traveling across country. He was trying to get to Florida. And I'm not sure he got there in time to join us on this meeting. I don't see him online. So that's okay. So I know also this afternoon, we were going to have Jim Kelly and Kel Mukamoto. It's my understanding that unfortunately, Jim is not able to meet with us today, and we certainly understand his reasons for that, and that's fine. But I do see State Forester Kel Mukamoto. Kel.
Oh, thank you, Chair Yamamoto. I'm happy to be here. And unfortunately, I'm going to have to step out at 3 o'clock because of a wildfire meeting, but with the governors, preparing for the governor's meeting. So, yeah, I apologize for that. Yeah.
Thank you for being here, however.
Okay, yeah, thank you.
So now let's go through and, also from the department, we've got Kate Skinner. Kate. Hello there.
Good afternoon.
Why don't you introduce the staff that you have online? Could you do that for us?
Yeah, I will. So first off is Mike Wilson, our Deputy Division Chief of Policy.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Michael, how are you?
Nick Palizzato.
Hello, Nick.
Good afternoon.
He's our Resource Support Manager. Helping us with all the details here, I'm going to highlight Jason Cox and thank him for getting us here today.
Hi, Jason Cox, ODF Public Affairs. Wonderful to see you all.
Hey, Jason. Great to see you.
I see Mike Cafferetta and Andy White are together. Mike's our Forest Grove District Forester and Andy, our Northwest Oregon Area Director.
Right.
Hello, everybody.
You're saving us some broadband space by being on one screen. That's a heck of a deal. Thank
Doing what we can.
Dan Goody, our Astoria District Forester.
Good afternoon, folks.
Oh, Dan, how are you?
Michael Curran, our West Oregon District Forester.
Good afternoon, everybody.
Oh, Michael.
And I think that's all our district foresters are on here this afternoon.
Okay, perfect.
All right.
Oh, sorry.
Nope, I think that's good for our side right now. Thank you so much.
Okay, great. So I'd like all the other commissioners that are online, and so I'm just going to go across the screen as you are on my screen. At least I hope to be able to do this. So Clatsop County, we've got Leanne Thompson.
Nice to see everyone today. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you for being here. Commissioner Willie,
Hi, everybody from Western Washington County.
Washington County, thank you. We went through Will. Commissioner Weiss.
Good afternoon from Benton County, Nancy Wise.
Thank you for being here. And Chair Smith.
Hi, Tootie Smith, Clackamas County.
Thank
Hello,
you.
everybody.
Thank you for being here. And again, I'm not sure you're all on screen. I show 41 people online, and I'm not sure I'll be able to get through all of it. Who have I missed as far as other commissioners, please?
I think Margaret Magruder is on, isn't she?
Yes, she's one of our executive board members.
Yes, you already got me. Did you get Aaron Scar? You got
Yes,
Aaron. Okay.
you guys aren't paying attention.
Oh,
You guys are not paying attention.
I've watched too much TV this afternoon, David.
Any other commissioners that I have missed, please? Seeing none, I want to make sure we recognize Brenda Howitt, Association of Oregon Counties, our staff person.
Hello. Thank you.
We have two members from Mason, Bruce, and Gerard, Mark Rasmussen and Mike Buffo.
Good afternoon.
Hi there. I know I'm forgetting people. I see John DiLorenzo down there. John.
Good afternoon, everybody.
So I know I'm forgetting people, but that's what I see on the screen currently. Anyone else we have missed that would like to introduce themselves? So I see we still have 41 participants, so I appreciate everyone being here. Okay, I guess I haven't missed anyone else. Okay, so let's move on with the agenda. Just let me make some quick opening remarks here. I appreciate everyone being online today. We are having a presentation from ICF today about the draft environmental impact statement. 1,850 pages. I'm hoping their PowerPoint isn't 1,850 pages. This hopefully will be an in-depth way for us to see all of the ins and outs of the draft EIS. I'm hoping everyone has read it in its entirety. It's quite a slog. It really is. But this is important moving forward with the trust lands. So at this point, I am just going to open it up to public comment. Do we have any public comment? I do want to recognize that we do have a written comment, and that is from Jim Fairchild. This was received by the department yesterday. It was interesting that we found out that we have no policy for accepting written comments. So I had a conversation with Kate this morning, and the department is working on how we are going to do this in the future. They're going to include us in that conversation about written comments, since we don't have anything specifying exactly how we do this. So again, I just want to recognize the written comment we got from Jim Fairfield, and this is going into our public record as public comment. Okay, so is there any other public comment? Okay, perfect. So we're running a little ahead of schedule, which is perfect. But now we want comments from our state forester, Kel Mukamoto. Kel, thank you for being here.
Well, thank you for having me. This has been a busy week for the ODF. We had a board meeting in Central Oregon, in Bend, Oregon. We were able to have a meeting on Wednesday, covered a lot of topics. Thank you, Chair Yamamoto, for coming and presenting on county issues. We appreciate, and your comments on the DEIS. Appreciate that. On Thursday, we went on a tour of Central Oregon, and this is interesting from the fact we toured areas west of Bend, Oregon, and looked at a lot of the collaboration work and fire resiliency work that's occurring in that area. And so that was very revealing, and they're making a lot of progress. I had a lot of experience in that area. I worked with collaboration groups since the 90s in that area, and to see the realization that what fire can do to those communities was very, very enlightening. But going back to the west side of the mountains, which is probably more important to you guys, I did have a great time coming out to the Astoria district. I think, was that about 3 weeks ago, Dan? I think that's about when I came out, and I didn't realize how snowy the west coast could be. But I was able to talk with Courtney Bangs. I appreciate having that time to be able to talk with you. And I was able to talk with people at the Astoria district and learn a little bit more about what's going out there. Unfortunately, snow kind of cut our tour short, and I do plan to come back out there and learn more. I was able this week to sit down and have lunch with Laura Wilkinson from Hampton, and I would like to come on out and just learn a little bit more about your area. Beautiful area. I've been there many times on the Parks Commission. I've been there on my own private time, but being able to be involved with the Clatsop Forest and so on will be good. Later, I think we have planned, Kate, that I'll come out and visit the Tillamook and see what's going on out there. So as we prepare for a great fire season, I mean, this year, the drought, it looks just as bad as it was last year. In fact, it might be even a little worse. And even though our protection chief, I assigned him with making rain and snow, he's doing a pretty good job. I don't think it's going to be enough to stop the fire season this year. So we're gearing up with severity and getting ready for another big fire season. We have crews dispatched down to Texas. We have them down in New Mexico right now, and they're doing a real great job. We're trying to create that mutual aid. Personally, I have been affected. A good friend of mine's house burned in Rio Doso. It was a really frightening. Quickly, how fast these things happen. She said her husband looked out the window and said, "Marie, grab your stuff. We're leaving." And as fires were lapping on them, they jumped into their brand new Bronco and took off, and their house was totally destroyed. But she has a very positive attitude. She says they are now like hippies, free, and they might just come to the north coast of Oregon and settle down. So, you got to be positive. So thank you for allowing me to be here, and I will be putting myself on mute and listening and learning. So thank you.
Well, thanks so much for being here. Matter of fact, I was down in your home territory late last week for the in Coos County for the Oregon and California Timberlands board meeting. We had a great time down there, and again, another beautiful part of the Oregon coast. It is not quite as nice as North Coast, but that's okay.
I'm sorry I missed that. I'll have to talk with you about what you learned, but if not, I will call John Sweet. Was John there by chance?
Yes, of course he was. Yes, he was.
Okay, wonderful. I need to talk to him. I talked to Melissa yesterday.
Oh, great.
And I didn't know that was going on. So, but we have unique beauty in all the coasts. I mean, and that's what makes our coast so wonderful, is that if you go from Brookings to Astoria, there's so much. It's just beautiful. It's just one. They're different, but they're all equally beautiful.
Yep.
We do have to have Shore Acres, though. Sure.
And so actually, we had our meeting on Thursday afternoon. On Friday, we got a special tour of the Bandon Dunes golf course complex.
Oh yeah. Did you have golf clubs?
Truly amazing. It's just unbelievable.
Well, that I find that development very interesting because they're very ecologically oriented too. If you talk to their staff out there, and they have done a great job. That links course is one of the top courses in the world, and we're so lucky to have that here on the coast.
It's amazing.
But I really want to purchase Terrible Tilly. I think that's kind of interesting, it being for sale. I think
It's interesting. It's called Terrible Tilly after Tillamook County, but it's actually off the coast of Clatsop County.
oh, well, maybe we should call it Courageous Cow. I like that because
There
my
you
name's
go.
in there. No.
All you need to do is buy it, and we can do that. You can do whatever you want. Absolutely.
All right.
Absolutely.
Hey, well, I thank you for coming down and being in Coos County. I appreciate that.
That was great. And Cal, I want to mention one other thing to you. I have made this offer to the Board of Forestry several times, but we have an organization in Tillamook County, Tillamook Working Lands and Waters Cooperative, and we take groups on tour. We take them up into a working timber harvest. We take them onto a local dairy. We're taking people to the brand new state-of-the-art Trask River Fish Hatchery. Matter of fact, last week, well, I'm not sure, I think it was last week, we had the House Energy and Natural Resource Committee on tour with us. And they were greatly appreciative, and they said they learned a lot. And I think we changed some minds. And again, we do this because as a commissioner, I go to AOC, Association of Oregon Counties, and I say when it comes to clean water and habitat restoration and fish recovery, no Oregon county does this better than Tillamook County. And first time I said that at AOC, eyes rolled all around the room. That's when we decided to bring everyone to Tillamook County to really experience firsthand what we do and how we do it. And it's truly an amazing tour. And we do change minds with that. So again, the House Energy and Natural Resource Committee had a great time. They thought it was very informative for them. So again, I would love to bring the Board of Forestry and ODF staff on a tour, the same kind of tour. And I made that offer a couple times, and I'm hoping sooner or later we will get buy-in from the department on that.
Well, thank you for the invitation. I'll extend that to Jim Kelly, and we could talk about that. And
Perfect.
if nothing else, I wouldn't mind bringing some of my people and coming out and learning something.
Yeah. We'd love to do that. We would.
Okay, appreciate that.
Thank you for that. Thank you so much. Okay, so we're still running ahead of schedule. Jim Kelly is unfortunately not able to be with us. So let's go right to ICF and Eco Northwest, who are going to do a presentation of the draft environmental impact statement associated with the public draft HCP. But I'm sorry, before we do that, Kate, do you have any comments that you would like to make before we start here?
I don't have any. I wasn't sure if Mike had any introductions you wanted to make there of Deb and
okay.
Shivangi.
Yeah, sure. So I think a number of you are probably familiar with our ICF HCP team, and that's the side of ICF that's been helping us to develop the HCP and so forth. The folks you're hearing from today, Deb Bartley's team is leading up the draft EIS. And so they are actually, working for NOAA Fisheries more than us. And Shivangi is with Eco Northwest, who did the economics analysis. And so they'll be presenting that to you today. One thing I'll just say for so that everybody realizes a couple things is, number one, there is essentially a firewall within ICF between the HCP teams and the EIS team, the NEPA team, to ensure that the analysis is objective. And then also just pointing out to folks today that we didn't have any public comment, but that any comment during a meeting like this is not part of the federal comment period. or does not go to the feds, that has to be done through regulations.gov through that process. And I think we'll have that link as part of the presentation perhaps, or you probably saw it on April 6th. Hopefully folks were able to watch that recorded public meeting as well. So anyway, with that, I'd like to hand it over to Deb and Shivangi. Thank you.
Perfect.
Thank you, Mike. And good afternoon, everyone. As Mike mentioned, I'm Deb Bartley with ICF, and I'm leading the NEPA team in support and taking direction from NOAA Fisheries, who is the federal lead agency for NEPA for this project. So I'm going to walk through the elements of the draft EIS process and document, including alternatives and analysis of effect on the environment. And Shivangi Jain from Eco Northwest will be presenting on the socioeconomics and environmental justice analysis part of that. There's a lot of information in the EIS, so we've done our best to distill what's presented to some of the key information and findings and to point to where these are further explored in the EIS document. I will note that the chapters of the EIS are approximately 150 pages. There is about 600 pages of technical appendices, as well as the scoping report, which includes all scoping comments that were received. And that alone, those scoping comments account for about 1,100 pages of the total page count. So not to be too put off by that big number of 1850. I do want to reiterate that our focus today is providing an overview of the draft EIS, and we are not representing NOAA Fisheries, and we're not speaking on their behalf. Am I presenting the slide deck? I guess I thought, Mike, that you all were, but if not, Lydia, if you don't mind sharing your screen, that would be great.
Yeah, I have it ready to go. I can share.
Yeah, the one that we provided to Mike would be great. To Kearns and West. I was talking like you all were seeing what I was seeing, which was the intro slide. It's very exciting.
All right, you should be seeing them in just a second.
Okay. Everyone.
Yeah.
Right. That was, then we can move to the next slide.
Okay.
So this just gives an overview of what we'll be presenting, just so you can kind of track where we are, and if you have questions or comments, and this will give you hopefully a sense of if we'll be getting to that. So we'll give a little background on why the draft EIS was prepared and describe the broader NEPA, National Environmental Policy Act, and ESA, Federal Endangered Species Act processes and how they connect, and the various roles and responsibilities of the federal agencies there. And then we'll provide an overview of the document, of the draft EIS, including starting with scoping. That process will present the purpose and needs statement, the alternatives development and screening, and talk about the forest modeling that was used, and present some of the key environmental effects. So to provide some context for what has led up to this point, NOAA Fisheries and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service are considering issuing permits that would authorize incidental take of species that are listed under the Federal Endangered Species Act, and that take that could occur from ODF's forest and recreation management activities in Western Oregon. And you all probably know this, but I'll just repeat that take as defined in the Endangered Species Act means to harass, harm, pursue, hunt, shoot, wound, kill, trap, capture, or collect, or attempt to engage in any such conduct. And incidental take is an unintentional but not unexpected form of taking. Section 10 of the Endangered Species Act allows incidental take of threatened and endangered species if that take occurs under an approved habitat conservation plan. And the HCP, the Habitat Conservation Plan, is ODF's plan to avoid, minimize, and mitigate for that take. The proposed issuance of an incidental take permit is considered a federal action under the National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA, and NOAA Fisheries is the lead federal agency preparing the EIS, and Fish and Wildlife Service is a cooperating agency under NEPA. The services have roles under both NEPA and ESA, and this figure depicts the steps in these processes with NEPA on the left and the ESA process on the right. As you can kind of hopefully see there, under NEPA as lead agency, NOAA Fisheries prepared the draft environmental impact statement. As a cooperating agency, Fish and Wildlife Service is providing technical expertise and document review. And NOAA Fisheries will review and consider all comments received during the comment period in preparation of the final EIS. And both agencies will prepare records of decision at the conclusion of the NEPA process to document their decisions. And on the right under ESA, both agencies have provided technical assistance to ODF in the development of the HCP. And each agency is responsible for making an incidental take permit decision for the listed species that are under their jurisdiction. And each agency will also prepare what's called a Section 10 findings and a Section 7 biological opinion to close out the ESA process. Next slide. So starting with the big picture, an EIS must address input from the public, tribes, agencies, and stakeholders, purpose and need for the action, a reasonable range of alternatives, and effects of the proposed action and alternatives on the human environment, as well as effects of environmental trends and planned actions. And we'll cover each of these in the following slides. Scoping is the first step, the first formal step in the NEPA process. And during scoping, the public, tribes, organizations, and agencies assist in the development of the EIS by identifying important issues and information and alternatives to the proposed action that should be considered in the EIS. NOAA Fisheries formally initiated the scoping period on March 8th of 2021 by publishing the Notice of Intent to prepare an EIS. And the public comment period ran from March 8th to April 21st. All comments that were received during scoping were reviewed and considered in the development of alternatives and in scoping the analysis of effects in the draft EIS. There is a scoping report, as I mentioned, that's included as an appendix to the draft EIS, which provides a summary of issues and information submitted and copies of all of the comments received. Purpose and need. NEPA requires that the EIS specify the underlying purpose and need which the agency is responding to. So in this case, the purpose of the federal action, which is issuance of incidental take permits to ODF, is to protect the covered species and their habitat while allowing ODF to manage the permit area in compliance with the Endangered Species Act. And the need for the federal action is to respond to ODF's request for incidental take permits for the covered species and covered activities as described in the HCP. In addition to the proposed action, an EIS must consider a reasonable range of alternative courses of action that meet the purpose and need, are technically and economically feasible, and in this case, meet the goals of the applicant. NOAA Fisheries conducted a rigorous alternative screening process based on federal implementing regulations. And as part of that process, NOAA Fisheries consulted with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and ODF for their expertise and input on technical issues. But ultimately, NOAA Fisheries was responsible for making the decision about which alternatives were analyzed in detail in the EIS. And the screening process and its outcomes are presented in a report that's appended to the EIS. 17 potential alternatives were screened, including the alternatives suggested in scoping comments. In some cases where an alternative did not pass the screening, elements of that alternative were able to be incorporated into the alternatives that were moved forward for detailed analysis in the EIS. And EIS Chapter 2 provides a description of all alternatives considered and the rationale for alternatives dismissed from detailed analysis in the EIS. Based on the screening, there were 3 alternatives in addition to the proposed action and no action alternative, which we'll discuss in a bit, that were included for detailed study, and I will describe each of these in the coming slides. Starting with the no action alternative. So under the no action alternative, the services would not issue incidental take permits to ODF for the proposed covered activities, and ODF would continue to implement these activities in the absence of an HCP and would continue to be subject to the Federal Endangered Species Act. Under the no action alternative, it's assumed that ODF would continue to implement these activities consistent with current forest management plans and the Oregon Forest Practices Act, with the intent to avoid and minimize the risk of take of listed species. And part of this approach involves conducting pre-harvest surveys to determine if areas planned for harvest are occupied by listed species. As described in the HCP, this management approach has been increasingly costly and disruptive to ODF planning and operations. And given the uncertain legal and regulatory landscape, shifting or expanding species distribution and the potential for new listed species in the future. So although this approach is not practical over the long term for these reasons, it does present challenges in terms of analysis over the 70-year time frame. The analysis of a no action alternative is a requirement under NEPA. Alternative 2 is the proposed action, and under the proposed action, the services would issue permits for authorizing incidental take of the covered species from the covered activities in the permit area for a 70-year permit term. The HCP includes 17 covered species, 10 fish species, 3 salamanders, 2 birds, and 2 mammals. And the HCP covered activities include timber harvest, reforestation and stand management, road system management, recreation facilities and infrastructure, and implementation of the HCP's conservation strategy. Under the proposed action, ODF would implement the HCP, including the conservation strategy and the adaptive management and monitoring program. The conservation strategy consists of 12 conservation actions, some that are focused on riparian conservation or aquatic conservation and some on terrestrial. The aquatic focused actions include designation of riparian conservation areas or RCAs and equipment restriction zones within the RCAs and restrictions on management activities in these areas. It also includes commitments to stream enhancement and fish passage barrier removal projects and standards for road enhancement and vacating and road and trail construction and management measures. The terrestrial actions include designation of habitat conservation areas and management of these areas for the purposes of conservation. Upland habitat management standards, for example, requirements for leaf trees, and strategic terrestrial conservation actions, including barred owl removal, as well as seasonal operational restrictions on covered activities. So ODF would also implement a monitoring and adaptive management program as part of the HCP to ensure compliance with the HCP, to assess the response of covered species habitat conditions to the conservation actions and evaluate the effects of management so that successful implementation of the conservation strategy can be assessed. Under alternative 3, the HCP would include the same permit area covered activities, permit term, and monitoring and adaptive management program as the proposed action. However, the conservation strategy would be modified to increase habitat protections or increase aquatic protections, including the following: RCA riparian conservation area widths on small perennial non-fish bearing streams and seasonal non-fish bearing streams that have potential to deliver wood to fish bearing streams would be increased beyond what's in the proposed action. ODF would broaden application of leave tree requirements from just the high hazard sites in the proposed action to also include moderate hazard sites. And ODF would adopt a risk inventory and evaluation program to support road drainage improvement and road vacating related target setting. Under alternative 4, the HCP would include the same covered activities, covered species, conservation strategy, and monitoring and adaptive management program as the proposed action, but it would have a shorter permit term. It would be 50 years instead of 70.
Deb, may I ask a question here?
Sure.
Thank you. Can you go back 2 pages, please? So under the increased conservation alternative, can I ask who proposed that alternative to you?
It's doesn't necessarily work that way.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I'm asking because FTLAC also proposed, submitted an alternative, which apparently was not considered. So I was just wondering, who might have proposed this one?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, we take all of the comments related to alternatives that we get as part of scoping, and they're all considered, in whole as they're part of developing and screening the alternatives.
Thank
So
you.
it wouldn't necessarily just be a single party.
Thank you.
Yep. Under alternative 5, the HCP would include the same covered activities, covered species permit term, and monitoring and adaptive management program as the proposed action, but would modify the conservation strategy to allow increased timber harvest volume by reducing the extent of HCAs, the habitat conservation areas, and by increasing allowed harvest in the HCAs. The overall extent of HCAs would be reduced approximately 15,500 acres compared to the proposed action, and allowable harvest of Swiss needle castands in the HCAs would be increased from 15,000 to 21,000 acres. The draft EIS analyzes potential impacts of the proposed action and alternatives on the 12 resource areas listed here. And in addition to those, in addition to this, analyzing the effects of the proposed action and alternatives on these resources, the EIS describes effects of reasonably foreseeable environmental trends and planned actions, including disturbance events and climate change and adjacent management activities. So we're moving into our discussion of environmental effects. I'm going to start with an overview because all of the alternatives include the continuation of ODF's forest and recreation management activities. The types of effects on the human environment are the same under all of the alternatives. So I wanted to give kind of a brief overview of that just to understand the general types of effects we're talking about. And then we'll look at the comparison between the proposed action and the no action alternative. So the primary driver of effects is the harvest of forest stands, primarily through clear cutting. And clear cutting has a variety of effects on the natural environment, including removal, modification, and fragmentation of terrestrial species habitat, increased landslide potential through increased soil instability and compaction and increased runoff, and degradation of aquatic species habitat through a reduction in wood available for in-stream recruitment, reduced water quality through increased temperature and sedimentation, and changes in hydrology and channel condition. And harvest also reduces carbon storage potential. Reforestation activities offset some of these effects over time. In addition to harvest, development of facilities, including roads, quarries, and recreation infrastructure would also involve removal of trees and other vegetation and would have similar effects described above to harvest, but at a different scale. Harvest and construction, as well as facility or harvest and construction activity, as well as facility use and maintenance would also involve the operation of vehicles and heavy machinery, which can disturb species in their habitat. And these activities would, along with controlled burns, emit pollutants, including greenhouse gases. And although, as noted above, timber harvest and removal of trees and vegetation for facility development would reduce carbon storage, the long-term management of state lands for forestry provides a substantial source of carbon storage over the analysis period. Although, as described on the previous slide, the types of effects are the same under all alternatives, differences in how these activities are implemented under the alternatives drive differences in these effects in terms of timing, location, and magnitude and duration. Constraints on harvest are a primary driver, and the EIS analyses used ODF's forest management model to understand these differences. So this slide summarizes some of the inputs and outputs of the forest model and the uses in the EIS analysis. Inputs include the ODF stand level inventory, regulatory and operational constraints, management prescriptions and financial considerations. And outputs include acreages of timber harvest and volumes of harvest, revenues and costs associated with timber harvest, forest stand attributes, including forest age and stand type, and distribution of these attributes across the modeled area, and carbon storage potential. And the model outputs were used as inputs for EIS analysis, including the following. The modeled harvest projections across the permit area were used to project new road construction and use. And forest stand attributes were fed into the covered species habitat models, and timber harvest projections were used as inputs for the socioeconomic analysis.
Deb, if I may interrupt one more time, please.
Sure.
So can you go back one page, page 19? Under the forest management model, your number one bullet point there, same types of effects under all alternatives. So Tillamook County is currently working with NOAA Fisheries and FEMA on their biological opinion, the NOAA Fisheries FEMA biop. And we were told that the longer the term, and NOAA Fisheries told us this, the longer the term of the HCP, the more rigorous the standards. So under alternative 4, reduced permit term of 50 years versus 70 years, wouldn't that indeed change the effects going to 50 years from a 70-year term on an HCP?
In this analysis, the alternative for the shorter permit term assumes the same HCP. So the same conservation strategy, same covered species, everything the same. So I can't speak to what NOAA Fisheries is requiring in the other process.
Well, that was just a conversation we had just earlier this week with NOAA Fisheries. And again, that was one of the issues that they brought up. So I just find it very interesting that in an alternative reducing the term of this HCP by 20 years, there are the same rigors of the EIS. That's just interesting that we're getting different strategies from NOAA Fisheries concerning the time of an HCP.
And that may also be the difference in what they're referring to is their requirements of that HCP and what it would need to do based on that permit term, which is a bit different than what you would assume necessarily in an EIS alternative, if that makes sense.
Well, I think we're gonna have to dig into that a little more with NOAA Fisheries. Thank you.
Yep. Yeah, so I think the only last thing I want to say here is that there is a detailed description of the model that's presented as an appendix to the draft EIS. And a few notes about the model results. First, they're not meant to be interpreted as harvest targets or to make precise predictions. Second, although the model does reflect past disturbance and post-disturbance management activities through 2018, it does not reflect disturbance that has occurred since 2018 or try to project future disturbance. And lastly, there are differences in the level of certainty of the no action model compared to the models for the proposed action and alternatives, mainly because the no action model is dependent in part on assumptions for future, for locations of future species occupation, which are unknown. The outputs have less certainty than the models that with the HCP, which are based on specific designated areas that are protected and managed for species objectives for the duration of the permit term. So the no action model ends up like the no action alternative itself, having less certainty than the proposed action and the alternatives with the HCP. And to give you a general sense of the difference in modeling projections for the proposed action and the no action alternative and alternatives 3 and 5 that vary the strategy. This slide shows average annual harvest volume in million board feet on top and average annual clear cut harvest acreage on the bottom. In the following slides, we'll do a deeper dive into some of the impacts that were analyzed in the following resource areas. And we'll describe effects common to all alternatives and then compare effects under the proposed action and no action. For the socioeconomics in section, Shivangi is going to present all of the alternatives together just because they're more numeric. I'll come back to alternatives 3, 4, and 5 for natural resources after her presentation. The first impact that we'll look at is how the age and structure of forest stands are projected to change over the analysis period. Based on the forest model results, under all alternatives, average tree age and trunk diameter increase across the permit area. The percentage of mid-seral stands, these are stands in the age range of 30 to 79 years, would decrease, while the percentage of late seral and old growth stands would increase. And late seral were considered those in the range of 80 to 174 years and old growth over 175. In comparing the proposed action to the no action alternative model projections, we have mid-seral stands decreasing less under the proposed action and late seral stands increasing less. So they're moving in the same direction, but to a different degree. Greenhouse gas emissions and carbon sequestration. So as noted earlier, under all alternatives, forest and recreation management activities would emit greenhouse gases related to vehicle and equipment use and controlled burns. And while forest stands, vegetation and soils would sequester carbon from the atmosphere and store carbon in the permit area. And while the amounts of quantified emissions and storage differ by alternative, the amount of carbon sequestered is expected to far exceed the amount that covered activities would emit under all alternatives. And that section in appendix presents quantification of the model results there. For covered salmonids, as stated earlier, timber harvest and development of roads and other facilities adversely affect aquatic species habitat through a reduction in wood available for in-stream recruitment, reduced water quality through increased temperature and sedimentation, and changes in hydrology and channel condition. Based on the forest management model, harvest and related activities are projected to be greater under the proposed action than the no action, with the caveat that the no action model does have greater uncertainty. Though activities are projected to be greater, the proposed action would better minimize and mitigate effects of these activities through implementation of the conservation strategy. So first, by establishing the wider riparian conservation areas and wider equipment restriction zones and increasing the restrictions on activities in these areas, the proposed action would increase large wood recruitment to streams, reduce stream sedimentation, decrease water temperature effects, and improve water quality and food for covered salmonids compared to the no action. And in addition, the commitment to a specific number of stream enhancement projects, both over the permit term and by decade, would increase certainty of long-lasting beneficial effects on habitat that would address some limiting factors for covered salmonids compared to the no action alternative, which doesn't include this commitment. And additional commitments for removal of fish passage barriers and more stringent design criteria could improve access for habitat or to habitat for covered salmonids. And committing to monitoring and documenting progress toward implementation of the aquatic conservation strategy and achieving the biological objectives for habitat are anticipated to benefit covered salmon compared to the no action, which does not have similar commitments. Moving on to the covered terrestrial species, as stated earlier, the primary effect of forest and recreation management activities under all alternatives is habitat removal and modification. Under the no action alternative, as described earlier, ODF would continue to conduct surveys in advance of harvest to determine if areas planned for harvest are occupied by listed species. If the species are found during these surveys, ODF would not harvest within a specified distance of determined occupancy. If the species are not found during surveys, harvest would occur. I'm hearing myself say not, and I'm wondering if I included a not in the wrong place there. So I'm going to say that again. If listed species are found during the surveys, ODF would not harvest within a specified distance of determined occupancy. And if they are not found during surveys, harvest would occur. And this approach makes harvest planning less certain and results in harvest occurring in a patchwork across the lands that causes fragmentation of the species habitat over time. And it's important to note that under this approach, habitat is avoided only as long as the species is deemed present. So that protection moves with the species, and it does not involve long-term habitat conservation. Under the proposed action, in contrast, take authorization would increase certainty for harvest planning with designated conservation areas and harvest focused outside of those areas. And this certainty flows into the forest model projections, which show increased harvest compared to the no action, and into the related species habitat models, which show some types of covered terrestrial species habitat decreasing compared to no action projections. However, the HCP would increase certainty around species habitat conservation and habitat connectivity to sustain the species populations in the permit area in the following ways: by establishing large contiguous areas of suitable habitat for the duration of the permit term, by managing those areas for species conservation, by committing to fund and implement strategic efforts to address limiting factors for these species, and by committing to monitor and document progress toward maintenance and enhancement of habitat over the permit term. In addition to considering effects of differences in regular or planned activities under the alternatives, the EIS considers the effect of differences in management response to disturbance events, which are anticipated to increase with climate change. The two main differences in management response to these events, one is salvage harvest and one is location of protected areas. For salvage, under the no action alternative, salvage harvest would continue to be allowed throughout state managed lands, which could delay or prevent habitat recovery after disturbance. Under the proposed action, removal of trees in conservation areas would be limited to what is deemed necessary to protect public safety or facilities, and these restrictions would increase the opportunity for restoration in disturbed areas. In terms of differences in locations of protected areas under the no action, protection would move with the species. If occupied areas become unoccupied following disturbance, they would no longer be protected. And if formerly unoccupied areas become occupied, ODF would avoid activities in these areas. And in contrast, under the proposed action, areas of habitat protection and conservation would remain fixed over the permit term. And were disturbance events to affect a large portion of the habitat conservation areas, this could be a disadvantage for the species. I will now turn it over to Shambhangi Jain, who provided the who will provide the slides on the socioeconomics and environmental justice analyses and discuss effects on these resources.
Yeah, before we let you go, can I ask a couple of quick questions here?
You bet.
So under all of this EIS, there is no expectation of take by the Department of Forestry under any of these models, nor mitigation. And recovery, anticipated recovery of the species. And let's talk about the spotted owl. I see no numbers anywhere on recovery statistics. Is that by design, or do we just not know?
Right. So it can be confusing sometimes with the difference between the EIS and the HCP. So the HCP does have to quantify take, and they do have to show that they have minimized and mitigated that take to the maximum extent practicable. The EIS analysis is comparing the effects on the species across alternatives. And it is not necessary for us to quantify or compare actual take in this analysis.
I understand that, but can you give us an idea, under one scenario versus another scenario, are there percentages of difference between mitigation and take and recovery of the species between any of those standards?
Yeah, I think in terms of recovery of the species, that is not the role of the HCP or the EIS, but I do think that the EIS analyses of the covered species speak to how the alternatives compare in terms of their, ensuring the likelihood of conservation and protection, or conservation for these species in the permit area. So they're not looking
Are
at.
you talking habitat?
Excuse me?
Are you talking habitat?
Well, there's a lot more than that. I think maybe it's probably not my place to go and read, go through the whole effects analysis related to the covered species. But I think that the EIS is addressing the adverse effects of the covered activities under the alternatives on the species, but it does not use take quantification as part of its calculation or as part of its analysis, if that makes sense.
Thank you. I see Michael Wilson has his hand up. Michael?
Yeah, I was just going to mention that. So in terms of the effects of the proposed action, that's in Chapter 5 of the HCP, and it is couched in terms of both habitat growth and harvest of habitat over time. I think what you're really looking for will become apparent in opinions when those come out from the services, and that is a more detailed quantification of take, and also includes the jeopardy call. So both Section 10 findings and Section 7 findings are part of the biological opinions that each service will issue to their covered species.
Thank you, Michael. Again, this is
yeah,
this is pretty deep stuff. It is. I see Mark has his hand raised. Mark Rasmussen.
Mike, when will we and the decision makers see that quantification then? When in the process does that occur? If it's not in the EIS or the draft, the DEIS or the draft HCP that we have here.
So schedule, oh, go ahead.
I was going to say that the HCP, go ahead, you can speak. You should probably speak to the HCP, not me.
Yeah, so the biological opinions will be coming out basically around the time that the the EIS is finalized. It's actually kind of the last step in the process. They finalize the biological opinions, and the biological opinions are actually the basis for incidental take permit issuance itself. And so that's where they'll come out. So it wouldn't be coming out until late next winter is when we anticipate the biological opinions.
So at this point, we can't tell how much impact there will be on the listed species
In terms of habitat,
in terms of population.
we can, but in terms of populations, no.
Yeah, okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Shivangi, and I will be walking you through the socioeconomics and environmental justice effect analysis. So the socioeconomics analysis assessed effects both quantitatively and qualitatively. Changes in timber harvest volumes and revenues were estimated using the forest model that Deb walked us through. ODF's log flow data informed the harvest volume going to mills. These model changes in harvest levels produce changes in employment, income, and government revenue. Direct employment and income were modeled for the Western Oregon region over the entire 70-year permit term using IMPLAN. Secondary economic effects were modeled for Western Oregon region for the first decade of the permit term using IMPLAN. A spatial analysis of modeled harvest allowed us to quantitatively estimate revenues to counties and taxing districts across the permit area over time. Key informant interviews with county officials and private timber companies were used to validate model assumptions. Qualitative methods were used to assess changes in non-timber special forest products and other ecosystem services. Next slide. Under all alternatives, timber harvest would continue to support local jobs and labor income through the analysis period. The sale of standing timber would continue to generate government revenue for state agencies, county governments, and taxing districts. The permit area would continue to provide a variety of ecosystem services, including special forest products, fish and wildlife that support fishing and hunting. It would also create value through carbon sequestration, would continue to provide habitat for threatened and endangered species, and would support cultural values. Next slide. Compared to the no action alternative, the proposed action would increase timber harvest over the permit term across the permit area based on the forest model results. This would result in an increase in revenue and direct jobs in the permit area over the permit term. These effects vary over time and location. For example, in some cases, values for some local units of analysis, like counties, in certain time periods may differ from the findings for the permit area as a whole. The modeled impacts on employment and income in the first decade suggest that there would be more total employment and income in Western Oregon under the proposed action. Economic impact modeling for secondary effects was not conducted for the entire permit term due to uncertainty in economic conditions and relationships in the longer time span. Local changes in harvest levels and resulting forest structure would influence the availability of non-timber forest products and other ecosystem services under the alternatives over time. Next slide. So this slide shows the differences in the modeled annual average harvest and employment generated in each county in the study area over the permit term between the proposed action and the no action. The proposed action produces a higher average annual level of harvest and employment overall than the no action. While most counties reflect this increase in harvest and direct employment, there are 5 counties, Coos, Curry, Jackson, Josephine, and Marion, that are projected to experience lower harvests and employment under the proposed action than the no action. The lower timber harvest in Coos, Curry, Jackson, and Josephine is driven by lower harvests in common school fund lands in these counties. Alternative 3 is projected to result in slightly lower harvests and associated employment for all counties except Jackson County compared to the proposed action, while Alternative 5 is projected to result in a slightly higher increase in harvest and employment for all counties except Coos County compared to the proposed action. Next slide. This slide shows a quantitative comparison of the modeled annual average jobs and labor income generated across the permit term in the first decade of analysis. The proposed action produces a higher annual average level of effect than the no action. The results for the other alternatives are similar to the proposed action, with a small increase for Alternative 5 and a small decrease for Alternative 3 compared to the proposed action. Alternative 4 would be the same as the proposed action during the modeled time period. So this is a map that shows the payments to counties from sale of standing timber on Board of Forestry lands. Most of the revenue generated from the sale of standing timber on Board of Forestry lands is distributed to counties where the timber harvest would occur. This map shows the percentage change in revenue distributed to the counties over the permit term under the proposed action relative to the no action. The overall modeled increase in timber harvest across Western Oregon is reflected in higher revenues for all counties except Marion County under the proposed action. Curry, Yamhill, and Jackson counties do not have Board of Forestry lands and are thus missing from this map. Next slide. Out of a total of 210 taxing districts that overlap with the permit area, 88% of taxing districts are projected to receive either the same or higher timber sale Board of Forestry land revenues under the proposed action compared to the no action. Increase in local timber sale revenues for school districts would increase the amount of state school funding available for all school districts. Out of the 5 school districts in Oregon that do not receive state school funding and have timber sale revenues that are higher than their equalization funding amounts, 4 of those school districts overlap with the permit area and are projected to receive higher timber sale revenues under the proposed action relative to the no action. Out of the taxing districts that overlap with the permit area, 26 taxing districts are projected to experience lower timber sale revenues, out of which 19 taxing districts would experience a decrease of over 10% under the proposed action compared to the no action over the permit term. Of these 19 districts, 9 districts are in Marion County, which would be experiencing overall lower timber sale revenues across the county. These districts include a mix of school districts, rural fire protection districts, and other countywide districts like the Marion County Library and the Soil and Water Conservation District. The 7 school districts that are projected to experience greater than 10% declines in timber sale revenues under the proposed action would receive an increase in state school support to match their equalization formula amount, such that the total state and local revenue received by the school districts would be the same between the proposed action and the no action. This information is a preview of the quantitative results that are available in the EIS, which provides results for direct employment, income, government revenue for all alternatives at various timescales and for different geographies, ranging from counties to affected taxing districts. So there's a lot more to dig into in the EIS itself. There's also a very detailed technical appendix that presents the methodology and assumptions that were used in the economic model.
So Shivangi, can I ask a question here, please? So I think what I heard you say, and this is what we've been telling the Board of Forestry all along, is that these decreases in timber revenue for school districts, even though the school districts will be affected by having less revenue from timber, that will have to be made up from the general fund coming from the state to balance their budgets. So that's what you're saying here, correct?
Yes. One caveat I will say is that because there will be more local revenue for other school districts, that will free up the general fund revenues for the school districts that are experiencing a decline in local timber sale revenue.
Interesting thought. Thank you.
Okay. The environmental justice analysis looks at disproportionate effects on low-income, minority, and tribal communities in Western Oregon. Across all alternatives, harvest-related employment, income, and government revenue would continue to benefit people in these communities. Sustained levels of ecosystem services would also support subsistence and cultural value. Next slide. Comparing the proposed action to the no action alternative, where reductions in harvest-related government revenue occur in certain time periods and locations, there is overlap with some low-income and minority communities. These reductions, where and when they occur, may adversely affect these communities. As changes in forest structure over time and location shift the supply of ecosystem services that support subsistence and cultural importance, it could increase travel costs or lower value of those resources for some tribes and environmental justice communities. Next, Deb will present some of the key differences in effects under alternatives 3, 4, and 5.
Thanks, Shivangi. So far, we've focused on the natural environment effects common to all alternatives and then compared the proposed action and no action results. So we'll spend some time specifically focused on the action alternatives and how they differ from the proposed action. Under alternative 3, most of the impacts would be similar to the proposed action. However, with expanded riparian protections, these are increased widths of riparian conservation areas on certain stream types, as well as more stringent road repair and vacating measures. We are seeing further improved riparian health and further reduced adverse effects on water quality and habitat for fish and stream-dependent species. And the more stringent road vacating goals could result in reduced public access for recreation and other uses. Under alternative 4, effects would be the same as the proposed action during the first 50 years of the analysis period. And there are quantitative analysis results presented in the EIS at this time period of 50 years. Under alternative 5, impacts would also be similar to the proposed action. However, increased timber harvest would increase the potential for adverse effects on water resources and habitat for fish and stream-dependent species, decrease modeled habitat for covered terrestrial species over the permit term, and further increase timber revenue and related economic effects, as Shivangi just presented. And that completes our presentation here today. Oh, no, it doesn't. I lied. We have one more slide just to review the next steps. Public review and comment period, as mentioned, I think earlier, ends June 1st, and comments can be submitted on regulations.gov. NOAA Fisheries will review and consider all comments received on the draft EIS and HCP in the preparation of the final EIS, which is anticipated to be released in early 2023. And finally, NOAA Fisheries and Fish and Wildlife will each issue a record of decision no sooner than 30 days after publication of the final EIS. That concludes our presentation.
Wow. Okay, so Margaret, don't look so surprised. Okay, so I guess we're so I hope Deb and Shivangi, you're staying with us to answer questions from all of us. I think we first had lined up John DiLorenzo. John wanted to make some comments here. John, you disappeared. Oh, there you are.
Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Great. Well, let me take my hand down first. I'm still, after months of working with Zoom, trying to figure out how all of this works. There we go. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm John DiLorenzo, class counsel for the counties and local governments participating in the Lynn County timber class action case. I'd like to address the declining timber and revenue forecasts that are made each time the HCP, which I'd like to remind everyone was negotiated without our participation. Every time it's refined, and the ongoing request by the department for you to now engage in this process. But first, I would like to direct some comments to the Forest Trust Land Advisory Council members about the elephant in the room, that being this week's decision by the Court of Appeals in our case. The court determined that the management standard was not an immutable term of what the court considered and assumed was a contract between the counties and the state. Now, of course, we respectfully take issue with that and will seek review of the decision in the Oregon Supreme Court for many reasons. Absent a management standard that is an immutable term, in other words, a term that cannot be changed by one party unilaterally. Absent a management standard, there would have been absolutely no inducement whatsoever for the counties to convey so many of their acres under the 1941 Act. And if things stand where they are presently, there is no longer any reason for any of our counties to consent to further land transfers, whether they come from public or private parties. Now, this case is going on its 6th year and is following the course set by the Crabtree case, which we refer to as Tillamook 1, which was litigated in the 1980s. I was a brand new lawyer then. I had just been admitted to the bar in 1980. And for those who might remember or have reviewed the history of the Crabtree case, the counties, like us, prevailed in the trial court on the issue of whether our arrangement was a contract or a trust. Like us, they also suffered a setback in the Court of Appeals, only to have their basic position restored then by the Oregon Supreme Court. This case has been a roller coaster for the entire 6 years in which I have served as your class counsel. And I fully expect that, like the counties in Tillamook 1, we will see our position restored by the Supreme Court. I want you to know that I absolutely intend to see this through. I will not quit until the state recognizes your role as contracting parties, not as mere stakeholders. Now, during the most recent Board of Forestry meeting, Chair Yamamoto presented a chart showing the harvest levels that were originally projected by the department's business case analysis. You'll recall that these harvest levels served as the justification for entering into HCP discussions to begin with. The chart also showed in stark contrast. Here's the chart, hopefully.
That's coming up. Can anybody see it?
I don't see it yet.
No, it disappeared. Is it there now?
What? No, I think most of us remember it though.
Okay, sorry.
That's all right. If you can maybe exit your screen sharing.
Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There we go. So the chart showed the projected harvest from the business case analysis. It also showed in stark contrast the harvest levels now projected as a consequence of the department, in my opinion, having given away the store in your absence despite your request to sit at the negotiating table. You'll recall you asked numerous times to be part of the negotiations between the state and the federal government, and your participation was denied. I believe, the state gave away many things in the HCP that the federal government did not even ask for. Now, those who watched Commissioner Josie's testimony during our trial will find this scenario reminiscent of the bait and switch when the department used the flawed Dr. Sessions' harvest projections to lure the counties into begrudging acceptance of the 2002 Forest Management Plan, only to later find that the Forest Management Plan would fall far short of the projections. So this appears to be becoming a habit. And after all this, the department wants to improve its relationship with the counties. Well, that's like an investment manager who has lost much of your principal through foolish investments, now wanting to improve his relationship with you. Well, members of the counties, leaders of the counties, that person can start by giving you your money back. That's how you start improving the relationship. So as you consider the various requests of the department to re-engage, I ask that you keep in mind the following 3 points. Number one, if there is no resolution of our differences, there is no peace. We are not stakeholders like the timber industry and the environmental groups. We are partners in this arrangement and must be treated that way. Number two, engagement at the tail end of the HCP process can only take place if the department is willing to amend the HCP with our input at the table and begin the NEPA process anew. And number three, we sink or swim together. The department is dependent for its non-firefighting budget on 1/3 of the revenues derived from our ever diminishing pie. The pie is diminishing due to the unilateral acts of the department against our best advice. We will face tough budget decisions in the future as the revenues we count on decline. Now, for the commissioners, that means services we provide will begin to disappear or be cut back, and people will lose their jobs. We should insist that the department in turn be in the same boat. We can do that by continuing to oppose general fund support for non-fire programmatic activity undertaken by the department. Now, I note the large number of ODF staff on this call. Don't think these budget problems will disappear. They won't. The budgets proposed by the ODF in consideration of our diminishing pie are not sustainable. And they will directly impact all of us if the department insists on pursuing what former State Forester Doherty called at trial a continuing downward trajectory. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This concludes my comments.
Thank you, John. I appreciate that, especially the great thoughts about continuing on with the Lynn County case, going to the Oregon Supreme Court. We all knew it was going to get there anyway, one way or another. So I think that's good news. I'm glad to hear that you are not giving up. And
no way. No way.
You've got the support, I think, of all the trust counties in this. Now, I do want to make just one clarification here. Again, restate the fact that, yes, over the past 3 years during the development of the HCP, I asked repeatedly to have a seat at the table as this HCP was developed. And each time I asked, I think it was 4 times, each time I was told, no, there is not a seat at the table for you, David, I'm sorry. And again, why a partner in this would be treated that way, not have a seat at the table, again, I just don't understand that. So again, I digress here. Courtney Banks. Courtney, Commissioner, you had your hand up early, so why don't you go ahead and start.
Okay, so just looking at this entire presentation and coming to the realization that everything circles back to a comparison to our no action data. And it was a really difficult presentation to watch while knowing inside just what a giant bias that no action data is. And I'm gonna get into that right now. So I wish to begin by saying that I agree with the statements made on page 59 of the draft EIS. The climate is changing and will continue to be a concern. And secondly, the decline in spotted owl is attached to a reasonably foreseeable trend that the barred owl population would expand, and this would lead to the direct decline of the northern spotted owl in the plan area. So I find the impacts to the socioeconomics of the different alternatives are based on incorrect data as called out in the very EIS supplied, page 59. The EIS states that from a services point of view, a reasonably foreseeable trend is that the barred owl population would expand, and this would lead to the direct decline of the northern spotted owl in the plan area, and Clatsop County agrees. This is a trend that has been proven true over the plan area in recent history with a very specific focus on the larger blocks of ODF land in the North Coast. These areas have seen a dramatic decrease in spotted owls over the last 20 years, despite forests growing older and more complex in large blocks of the ownership. On page 118, referring to the modeling data provided by ODF to services for review, it states that the model assumes suitable habitat for federally listed species would be occupied by those species and therefore off limits to harvest under the no action alternative. This assumption directly contradicts the foreseeable trend the draft EIS provided on page 59. Large swaths of land on the North Coast are suitable for habitat today without spotted owls being present. In fact, they are decreasing across the landscape, as has been proven by over 33,000 owl surveys by ODF themselves. Clatsop County is on the verge of potentially delisting their 2 owl circles this year. The assumption that if you grow it, they will come is a false assumption. This false assumption appears to have been built into the very model specifically to make the no alternative appear worse for harvest than the HCP itself. If I were a Board of Forestry member, I'd be pretty pissed by the blatant misdirection and heavily biased modeling you have provided in order to make such an important decision. If the modeled data instead took the foreseeable trend mentioned on page 59 of the draft EIS into account, more habitat would have been made available, and the socioeconomic impact of proceeding with the HCP would have been dramatically different with all of the alternatives in comparison to the no action alternative. This assumption that if you build it, they will come was built into every single covered species. I think that's a bit overboard. This means vast tracts of land were put off limits on year 1 of the model, as they are already meeting the habitat requirement, although they do not have a covered species currently present. This description of the model data states that since there is highly suitable habitat across the districts that is currently unoccupied, that in the very first year of the HCP, suddenly we are going to have occupation and thus off limits to harvest. Since ODF's current management plan has been designed to grow this habitat, it isn't surprising that this would be evidenced by the volume and the acreage available, starting at such a low rate in the first period and remaining at that low rate over time. This is also assuming that another alternative is not looked at, where the Department of Forestry looks at their current activities and takes an approach of risk management. Not growing trees or stands to an age where they meet habitat requirements would mean that the risk of covered species moving in decreases over time. Clatsop County respectfully requests that either these models be rerun to provide realistic and currently provable trends for threatened and endangered species, which will then provide a more accurate no action by following the current proven ratio of occupancy versus habitat available. Or that ODF takes a few years to mitigate some of the current highly suitable habitat that is currently not occupied by any species of concern. If the assumption is made that any highly suitable habitat will immediately become occupied, the alternative should also be explored, where ODF looks at a rotation age and strategy that would mitigate the number of stands that fall in this category. If this assumption remains, then the growing stands into this habitat type directly puts the socioeconomics of the department and the counties in which these lands reside at risk. This elevation of the environment at the detriment of economic and social outcomes does not meet anyone's definition of the greatest permanent value. So I'm going to talk about the second point, moving from owls to climate change. The DEIS clearly states, and I agree, that the climate is changing and temperatures will increase over time. I'm glad that we're on the same page for that. However, instead of looking at this and saying, well, that means the climate here will begin to look like the species composition of Northern California, so maybe we should just start doing small stand replacements and planting climate resilient species. The tactic instead is to reserve the existing forest. I guess with the idea that if we don't cut the tree species, it won't need to acclimate into this new climate and everything will be fine, but it won't be fine. By leaving these areas in preserves, we will be creating a giant fire hazard that will cause all of the threatened and endangered species we've worked so hard to save to burn. The carbon that we've sequestered and not put into boards that would have been a long-term carbon sink while also providing jobs, yeah, that will burn too. We will be able to breathe that carbon deep inside our chests while air toxicities and levels will rise. We will be unable to salvage harvest. The HCP will require us then to sequester our green, further choking the economics of my community. The best part about this story is that it's not conjecture. We've already have ample examples of how this plays out. Just look at Detroit Lake and the community begging to salvage to prevent future devastation. They are being ignored while, well, they're being ignored. The Board of Forestry has been looking for a new vision for forestry moving forward and looking at our federal lands and the disaster that has played out there. Now they're directing the Department of Forestry to implement a plan that mirrors the federal disaster. One definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. At what point do your rural communities begin to become the threatened and endangered species too? The decisions that have been made on the no action alternative were clearly made to give the worst case scenario. Okay, it's good to have sidebars. It does not, however, speak to the uncertainty that was preached consistently throughout this process. So you gave us the worst. Now please give us the best. Run some scenarios where the species that are not listed don't become listed, where species that are dying out don't suddenly pull a pet cemetery type resurrection. Give us that range. That way we can truly make an educated decision. If a salary can range between $50,000 per year to $100,000 per year, that's a pretty uncertain range. If I only tell you about the $50,000, it paints a pretty bleak picture. Please paint the whole portrait. If the HCP is the best option, then it'll be obvious. If you feel like you need to hide the ball, feel free to ask yourself why. In response to the counties and board members that I see have very little in stake in this conversation, imagine if a state agency and a board suddenly told you that you couldn't reap an income off of 10 to 20% of your land base. You also can't convert it to something else potentially profitable. You'll instead have to sit back and watch it die and burn. You'll get to watch close that employ thousands in your community. I'd expect that you'd have a very bitter pill for you to swallow. I'd expect you to fight. I wouldn't sit back and judge you and demand that you be nice to the people who are choking you. So I ask you to give me that same respect. Clatsop County is 87% forests. 87% forests. That's something we cannot change. So please do not cast judgment on me and my community for investing, protecting, and believing in the economic and environmental legacy that we've created, and that we feel that we should have a say in how it's managed. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Banks. I know how difficult this is. When we look at the numbers in the draft EIS and the HCP, Clatsop County is going to be hit especially hard from this. They will, no doubt about it. Other comments, questions? So I've got just a couple then, if no one else is going to jump in. So I know that these are different people, probably different groups within ICF. But again, I just need to say that the business case analysis presented to the Board of Forestry in 2018 painted a pretty rosy picture, and that document was used to get a thumbs up from the Board of Forestry to continue to work on the HCP. Now, a short 4 years later, and again, I wish I could bring the chart up, but I'm just not good at this screen share and stuff. We see the numbers drastically different than the business case analysis that was presented in 2018. And again, I know it's different people in ICF. I know it could be even different groups within ICS that have done these things. But in 4 short years, I'm concerned the numbers are so different, and yet the term of this proposed HCP is 70 years. And I'm just not sure once an HCP is put into place, it's a contract with the federal agencies. And I am just not sure that any changes can be made. If we saw such a huge change in 4 years, what are we going to see in 70 years if this HCP goes into place? Can anyone answer that question for me?
Yeah, I can answer the specifics on that, Commissioner Yamamoto. I want to draw basically explain the business case, the comparative analysis, and the draft EIS in that order. When we formulated the business case, there was not a modeling exercise. It was essentially an inventory exercise. Assumptions were made around constrained acres or potential constraints in the future without knowing grow forward potential for stands to grow into suitable habitat. The purpose of it was simply to see if an HCP was worth investigating. And so we did move forward with that. So the modeling that's been done, what you see presented in the draft EIS for the no action alternative and for the HCP, the proposed action, are the same modeling that was done for the comparative analysis. The 2020 presented to the board in October of 2020. And so that has been that's been the basis for this all along. So the board looked at those numbers, and we're looking at those relative outcomes as it moved forward. When you speak to the certainty in the future, the one thing that is more certain with the comparative analysis is we actually had an HCP strategy drafted up, which we did not have at the time of the business case. analysis. There were no formal HCP strategies at that point. So that's the timeline there and the history there.
Commissioner Bangs, you have your hand up. Sorry. No, you are muted, Commissioner.
Thank you. So in layman's terms, it just sounds like you misled the board in 2018. But that's just, you know, my perception of what you've just said. And I'm just really curious about how habitat can equal occupancy when that is so very proven by you yourselves. I think it's 33,700 surveys that you took, mainly up here in the North Coast, that said the exact opposite of that, but yet you chose to put that into your modeling data, habitat equaling occupancy. When I live here and I know, and I'm looking all around me at all of the habitat, there are not spotted owls. And so you've just said year one, the first year of the HCP, the very first year, all of a sudden we are going to be inundated with owls from Jewel to Napa, everywhere. And I'm wondering, as a science teacher, how that is even possible for a state agency to think that that type of bias being put into modeling data is okay. I'm sitting here teaching statistics and all kinds of things to children. And in fact, my 7th graders just learned about bias in their statistics unit. So I'm trying to understand why would you do that to us? Like, why? And then on top of that, why do you think it's okay? Like, so I'm sitting here trying to understand why it, like, you can't make 4 years of work on false information and then expect another state board to make a decision that is supposed to be based in fact. So pardon me for kind of being a little frustrated, because I'm looking at losing millions of dollars for my community and hundreds or thousands of jobs on false modeling data. A poison pill, a deuce in the pool, whatever you want to call it. So I'm just gonna click off for a moment.
Thank you, Commissioner Bangs. I understand how difficult this is for you. I do. Commissioner Magruder.
Chair Yamamoto, one of my concerns is, and thank you, Commissioner Bangs, for your information, but one of my concerns is that I realize that we have Oregon Department of Forestry staff online, but we don't have Oregon Board of Forestry members online, and part of our mission is to advise those folks, and I'm concerned about how they will get this message that we are sending. I know that this is probably recorded and they might be able to listen to it, but I would really like to see Board of Forestry members able to participate in this conversation. And I know that Chair Kelly had another obligation that was a family obligation, I believe. So I would certainly excuse him, but it would be nice if we were communicating with the people that we are, our mission is to advise. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Magruder. Let me attempt to answer that. As you all remember, at our last FTLAC meeting, we had several Board of Forestry members online. And at that point, Chair Kelly asked that he didn't know if it was appropriate to have multiple members of the Board of Forestry at our FPLAC meeting. And I immediately said that, well, as a commissioner, we're very familiar with issues of having too many commissioners or too many board members on the same call. But the way commissioners do it across the state and across the nation, I'm a member of NACO, the National Association of Counties. The way we do this is we publicly notice our meetings, stating that we're going to be together. And that meeting was noticed, and it actually was a staff member from ODF that chimed in after me and said, yes, this meeting has been noticed. And as long as they're not making any decisions, a quorum is not a bad thing, and multiple members of the Board of Forestry could be there. Well, since that time, the department has determined that it was not a good idea for multiple members of the Board of Forestry to be present at our meetings. And I am very concerned about that, because this body, the Forest Trust Lands Advisory Council, is an advisory committee to the Board of Forestry and the state forester. So for a decision to be made that Board of Forestry members are not able to be at our meetings and hear what FTLAC commissioners are talking about, to me, that just does not make a lot of sense. So again, I appreciate you bringing that up. I don't know exactly what the situation is. So Commissioner Banks, you had your hand up.
Sorry. So in all of my friskiness in the last moment, I didn't give you a chance to answer my question. Did you mislead the board in 2018?
No, we went with the best assumptions that we had at the time. Just to be clear, the suitable habitat selected in the model, it wasn't from day one. We modeled out a certain number of periods to see what happens, see how much suitable habitat would grow even with a harvest plan. And you see that reflected in the no action alternative in the specific model workbooks that have been shared online. And the other thing is we have other species involved there. Most importantly is red tree voles. We don't know the extent of occupancy by red tree vole at this point. We know that even though the last decision from the service was to not list, that that's in being contested now again. And part of that not to list decision actually had to do with state forest management and the development of our desired future conditions in that assessment. So a number of things went into the actual selection of habitat for the no action alternative. I will grant you it is a bit of uncertainty for sure. The other thing that I would add to that is we are active participants in the barred owl management strategy working group with the Fish and Wildlife Service. Landowners are looking at implementing barred owl management control on their lands, regardless of the policy context under the ESA. And that is something that ODF would likely be involved with or at least affected by. So that's, some of those owls will certainly repatriate areas when barred owls are eliminated.
So what you're telling me is that birds that lay eggs, that you're going to go out there and you're going to shoot them with the expectation that you're going to eliminate barred owls across the landscape until the next year when they lay eggs. So I just find that a little ironic, but I wanted to circle back to the red tree vole. So isn't it true that the red tree vole does not need a spotted owl tree stand in order to survive, that they can be in a 20-year-old stand, a 30-year-old stand, potentially stands even younger?
The extent to which they're in younger stands, they are typically adjacent to older stands, and it is not really well understood the nature of that occupancy, whether it is some kind of spillover or whether there's actually some kind of life history function there, but there's still a lot of research to be done on that.
So you're willing to make a decision, a 70-year decision on something that's not well understood. I just wanted to be clear about that particular point. And then secondly, I would really appreciate ODF to do additional modeling using the ratio of occupancy versus habitat available before moving forward. Because I really think, as you keep stating, you know, there's a lot of unknowns. So let's give us, I mean, you've obviously given us the low end. So let's give us the other sidebar. I'd really appreciate that.
Thank you, Commissioner Banks. Kate Skinner. Kate.
Oh, sorry, I forgot my hand was up. I just, I wanted to respond to Commissioner Magruder there. One of the last topics on our agenda I'll get into here a little bit later is an opportunity to have a conversation between the board and FTLAC specific to this topic. And we're working hard to prepare for that and to bring everybody together.
Thank you for that, Kate. Nick.
Yeah, hey, just to follow up, Commissioner Banks, on the occupancy versus habitat. We haven't surveyed for tree voles or two of the other species we're proposing to cover. So that would be a challenge because we have no occupancy data. And on tree voles, yeah, they do use young stands. There's a lot of research going on trying to figure out the nature of that use. We're participating in those studies. But to me, that has an even more chilling effect. Should a listing occur, it means we can't count on stands under 80, for example, either. And that occupancy could occur across our landscape in stands as young as 20 or 30. So to me, it's even more of a concern. And we didn't factor that into either the business case or the comparative analysis. We just assumed a certain level of maturity equaled habitat, and we know they occupy younger stands too. So arguably, constraints would be larger.
Mr. Banks.
So arguably, you could potentially layer species upon another species. So say all of that marbled murrelet that you have reserved could be red tree vole. And then you could open up our spotted owl in this situation. The large swaths of land that you've reserved for spotted owl that currently don't exist in Clatsop County. So, I mean, I'm just thinking about, you know, what arguably could happen. And I'm wondering why there's an unwillingness to double up on available lands within this HCP, double up species. I mean, you save salamanders when you save coho, that's doubling up. So I'm wondering why you can't double up that red tree vole when we don't have owls anymore. So that's just a thought.
So
Arguably.
So good question. So to be clear, we do have two currently active spotted owl sites on the Clatsop State Forest, and we have observations of other owls that we're trying to figure out the nature of their status. But regardless of owls, we looked at the overlap of habitat in both designing our habitat conservation areas and in the assumptions around the constraints for each modeling effort that we undertook. And you can see, actually, you'll see in some of the data on the constraints tables, the amount of overlap among the categories is significant. The thing with tree voles is it is additive. Should a listing occur, those occurrences are additive, meaning we don't get to dictate that they overlap with our existing occupied sites. They occur where they occur.
So,
and likewise, the benefit of an HCP is we do get to dictate that by the design of our habitat conservation areas.
I'm just going to circle back to, you've showed us the low end, and I really would appreciate if you would show us the high end potential of what no action would be for us using actual scientific data that is proven across the landscape. That is a request, but you know, I'm just going to take a break and see if anybody else speaks up, but it just seems pretty shady to have you spoke to our 2 owl circles that, have the potential of being delisted this year. And I say the word potential because I guarantee that they're not going to be delisted because that doesn't fit the narrative. And that's just sad. That's shady. So I'm going to take a break.
Thank you, Commissioner Banks. I just want to bring up an article that I presented in my Board of Forestry testimony 2 days ago. It's in the Journal of Biological Conservation, and it's entitled Range-Wide Declines of Northern Spotted Owl Populations in the Pacific Northwest, a meta-analysis. And this article, it's the authors are undisputable experts in the area. Most from federal agencies across the United States. And it clearly specifies that habitat is not the major problem with the spotted owl. It is the barred owl. And again, when I ask the question about habitat, are we preserving habitat or are we preserving the species? And invariably it comes back to habitat. And that's one of the things that just really bothers me. And again, the Board of Forestry is dealing with such a small part of the forests in the state of Oregon. The vast majority of forest land is U.S. Forest Service, BLM, ONC lands, private timberlands, and the vast majority of especially BLM and U.S. Forest Service lands is already in reserve, just hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of acres. And yet we continue to see declines. And yet the Department of Forestry, with the small amount of forest land that is controlled by ODF, feels it imperative to put even more of this forest land in reserve for a species that, again, unless we have dramatic control of the barred owl, unfortunately, the spotted owl is doomed to extinction. Not what we want to see, but putting additional habitat aside, to me, is just not the answer. And please, everyone, look at this. It doesn't show up, does it? Look at the study and research it. And again, I don't think habitat is the issue here. Nick, I saw your hand up earlier. You put your hand down, and you don't want to address it.
I guess I would defer to Mike or Kate whether or whether you want to hear my response.
Nick, I understand. These are difficult conversations. Believe me, these conversations are as difficult for the commissioners here as they are for staff. They are. We have differing opinions here. And when we throw up science, again, it's just sidestep. And I don't know. And I don't know. I certainly won't.
Sorry.
Go ahead, Nick. I'm sorry.
Mr. Yamamoto. I do have thoughts on that paper. I guess I will chime in. And so to be clear, that's a range-wide study, and the findings were that at the range-wide scale, meaning Washington, Oregon, and California, the biggest drivers over the period 2003 to 2016 has been barred owl invasion. We know that. That's clear. They did a great job of documenting that. Incidentally, over that period, the habitat trend was relatively stable. There was a slight decrease. So in that analysis, you wouldn't expect to see a strong habitat effect at the range-wide scale, given those factors. Those same authors, many of those same authors, submitted a separate analysis, published a separate analysis a couple years prior, looking specifically at the relationship between the intensity of barred owl removal and habitat condition. They found very dramatic differences among regions of those 11 study areas, and they found very strong habitat effects in most of the regions, meaning and their findings were essentially that, yes, barred owls are the biggest driver these days, and it needs to be addressed immediately and intensely over the short term. However, long-term recovery of populations, et cetera, will have different levels of success contingent on habitat in a given area of concern, very clearly and very strongly. So then you talk about the North Coast. Of course, you know, we all know the condition that these lands came to the agency in, and they're now growing towards maturity, towards habitat, some of them. And so what we have is a habitat poor condition from the get-go. What that analysis will show you is that removal intensity has little effect. So you can remove more and more barred owls in that scenario, and you get a very low likelihood of spotted owl survival without habitat improvements. And we're very clear on that, you know, ultimately long-term habitat is as important to spotted owl conservation. So on the Tillamook, you know, we're also, there are fed lands, you know, feds are 60% of the coast range, let's say, for purposes of just talking about the coast range. And we're 4%. However, on the North Coast, north of the Siuslaw, when you leave where the majority of federal lands are, we become the primary public land manager. And so in Tillamook County, I believe we're 43% of the public land, something like that. And in Clatsop County, it's something like 87%. And so we do, state forests have an outsized role for spotted owl conservation on the North Coast. By the way, barred owl management is a component of the HCP. It's in the HCP. That's it.
I understand. And again, I go back to the FTLAC alternative that was submitted. And it was, I mean, 1,850 pages in the draft EIS, and I don't know how many hundreds of pages in the HCP. Our alternative was 4 pages, and it talked about barred owl control and the ability to give back like 100,000 acres of harvestable timber to the trust counties. And again, it was not even addressed when things came to closure here, and that's just so disappointing. Not from a stakeholder, from your partners in this endeavor, and that's what's again kind of frustrating. Commissioner Banks.
Isn't everybody happy to hear me talk again? So I just want to be clear that no one here today is saying no to habitat. I want to be clear, I'm not saying no to habitat. What I want to make abundantly clear is habitat does not equal occupancy. And so running models off of habitat equaling occupancy is false. And I think that, I hope that everyone that leaves this meeting today can understand why I am saying that. Is because we have a lot of habitat out here in Clatsop County. I'm looking out my window at habitat right now. There are no owls. And so I'm not saying no to habitat. I'm saying no to making an analysis on false information and then requiring a board, though it's not me. Sadly, I don't get to be a part of that, even though I've personally requested multiple times to be a part of it. I don't get to have a say in the future of the county that I'm representing. That you provided false information. There is a way to do that statistically to make sure that you're not providing false information for an analysis study. It's by using a ratio of occupancy versus habitat provided. So we have the abundant habitat and how much of it is actually occupied. And then circling back to Commissioner Yamamoto, 3%. State lands is 3%. State lands is 20% in my county, 20. Okay. State lands is 3% of the entire state. Okay. I'm fighting for 20% because part of this HCP that I don't think that anybody really understands is when these trees die, the ones that you're you're sequestering within the HCAs when they die, either be it to the climate changing or say there's a wildfire. We can't salvage harvest. And we are bound by this contract to provide green acres. So slowly, our piece of pie will be taken away from us as it burns, as it dies, whatever. So that's why I'm so passionate about this conversation. Not only about the false information, but about what is going to happen to my community because of this decision.
Thank you, Commissioner Banks. Just one other thing I want to state here is that, you know, FTLAC, again, is your partner in this. And we're the only advisory committee in Oregon that has a statutory responsibility to advise the state forester and the Board of Forestry on matters which affect management of state forest trust lands. And again, that's under ORS 526.156. And it's just so unfortunate that we are so frustrated that we continue to provide this testimony before the board and before the department, and we just seem to get nowhere. It seems that all the other stakeholders in this have a much stronger voice when it comes to the Board of Forestry and the department, and it's just frustrating. It really is. So Mike, you mentioned that, you know, it's going to be later on before we actually see numbers, recovery numbers for the spotted owl and the marble murrelet and coho salmon, and the actual take that might occur under an HCP and mitigation. And I'm not sure when we hear those numbers, whether it's going to be too late for us to even comment. Can you clarify in a little more detail when we should anticipate to see these numbers?
Not any more than around the time that the EIS is finalized. I'm not sure of the exact internal schedule that the services are working on their biological opinions. So, I mean, what I think I would say really is that the time for, you know, continued testimony to the board, you know, is now and continuing through, you know, it will be an agenda item in September when we bring back all of the comments from the federal process to the board so that they are aware of those. And of course, you know, I think you should continue to engage the board in that, and that's really the way to get the comments to your, you know, to the board that you advise, right? For sure. Comments to the federal services also are good. You know, in terms of directed comments on, you know, how to improve the analysis under the draft EIS, you know, that's a particular set of comments, and then comments on the HCP as well. Thinking of it from, you know, what the feds, expressing that interest to the feds in their public comment process. And that's just completely separate from when you know, go to the board and of course, you know, advise them on your viewpoints. But I'm sorry, I don't have a more, I'm sorry, I don't have a more specific date.
I understand. Again, I need to make these comments, and I wish at least one Board of Forestry member was here, and I wish Jim Kelly was here. I certainly understand why he's not with us today, and Cal had to leave. But in my testimony on Wednesday, I asked the board to get information on 4 questions, and I'm hoping those questions get answered to the satisfaction of the board. You know, how would threatened and endangered species populations change under the HCP? What is the biological potential for timber production of state forest lands? Again, I don't think we know that anymore. We have come so far from the 1930s and 40s and 50s and 60s. I don't think anyone has an idea what the true potential of our state forest is today. Third, how much take of covered species is expected under the HCP and how much mitigation will be provided? And again, we'll get those answers at a future date. And then four, I've asked this question already in this forum, you know, why have the assumptions in the business case analysis proven so inaccurate? And I appreciate the answer, and I do. I'm not sure I am totally comfortable with that. We're gonna have to do some more soul searching ourselves. I'm not talking about conspiracy theories, anything like that. I am not, but it just makes me uncomfortable that in 4 years we see such a difference in numbers. It really does. Commissioner Banks, you've got your hand up again.
I do. I think that there's a misconception that is occurring, and sadly, it's, you know, folks who don't live here probably don't understand it. That this isn't our only economic endeavor in our county, but it is something that, you know, as everyone in this room knows, this area was a clear cut in the 20s and 30s, and our families before us invested in what is basically an environmental and economical legacy. And we're being told now that we made a poor choice in investing in this legacy. Instead, you know, to give a sister city, you know, Portland chose to pour concrete over their clear cut, and we did not. And it's really a hard pill to swallow to feel like you're getting punished for doing such a good job at that environmental and economical legacy. I'm also being told that you don't get to have any choice in how it's going to be run. They told you, you know, to sit down and be quiet and take it. And why weren't you thinking ahead and doing a better job economically? When we're sitting here going, this was our investment. This is our investment. That 87% of forest lands is never going to change for us here in Clatsop County. It may burn. My house may burn. People may burn. Because that's been proven across the landscape in the state of Oregon over and over again. So I guess I'm just sad. I'm really sad that this is where we're at in this discussion of, you know, take it and shut up. And for other counties or other people that sit in judgment of us and say, well, you should have just done a better job creating economics in your county. Well, you know, we were doing a great job. And all of a sudden, somebody came in and said, nope, can't use it anymore. And you certainly can't use it for anything else. So it's just going to be locked up tight. You'll never be able to use it again. That's frustrating to hear for us, because I'm sure, you know, if Corvallis or Portland were told, hey, you can't use 10% of your land to reap an economic benefit off of, you better believe they'd pitch a fit. And so I'm just sad. So that's basically where I'm going to leave it at today. I'm just sad, and I'm a little fearful of what is going to happen to Clatsop County in the next 20 to 30 years. Wildfires are a really big concern for us, and we only have 2, possibly 3 ways in, depending on where you go, and 2 or 3 ways out. And Tillamook's sitting in kind of a very similar situation. So it's going to be devastating. That's what it's going to be.
Thank you, Commissioner Banks. Michael, I just want to address one other issue you brought up, and I appreciate it so much. You know, we cannot give up addressing the Board of Forestry. I absolutely agree with you. At the same time, over the years, we have asked for more than 15 minutes. As your partners, we've asked for more than 15 minutes to address the Board of Forestry, and we keep being told no. Again, that's part of the frustration. As your partners, you know, should we be allowed more time? I would hope so, but difficult to get across the points we need to get across in 15 minutes. So again, that's just part of it. And I want to let the other board members, FTLAC board members know, we have a workshop coming up with the Board of Forestry on the 10th of May. And this was kind of touted as let's get together and learn more about each other so that we can have a better relationship and move forward to a better place, which I think certainly could have happened. It's going to be a little more difficult now. The department has decided that this workshop is going to be virtual only. So again, I don't know if it's going to continue to be facilitated. Will it continue to be facilitated? Do we know?
Commissioner Yamamoto, I can jump into what I was going to talk about today if you'd like me to do that.
Thank you. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
please.
Absolutely. So let me start with saying there's been a lot of work going on, as Commissioner Yamamoto said, to and this was really a concept Liz Dent brought forward before she left, of having the board and FTLAC members have a chance to talk about the draft EIS. And so May 10th, I think it should be on all of your calendars. What we have is the Board of Forestry will be having a meeting. They will see, I think, the identical presentation you've seen today from ICF. They will have time to talk about the draft EIS, what they've read in it, what their questions are as well, and chat with ICF and our staff as well about what's going on. We've been having one-on-one conversations with board members to understand their questions so that we can answer those at the meetings. And then, yes, we are going to have a facilitated conversation. Ellen Palmquist and Sylvia Turbowski from Kearns and West are going to help us with that. And so starting on Monday, Mike and I will be tag teaming with Sylvia and Ellen to meet one-on-one with each of the FTLAC members to talk about the logistics of that meeting, to talk about questions to bring forward, as well as opportunity just to meet Sylvia and Ellen so that all of you, when we all come together, everybody knows who's going to be there and speaking. And we've also asked the board members for what are some questions that they would like to hear from each of the commissioners as they think about and they consider the draft EIS, the draft HCP, and what they're looking at. So, so that agenda, the meeting overall is 1 to 5 o'clock, I believe. I think we have an hour and a half of the conversation. And the reason we have gone to virtual is we're all kind of in this moving from the virtual world to in-person into hybrid, which is going to be with us. Like the meeting today, this was not on your annual calendar and we had made room for it. And I really appreciate all of you doing that today with us. The May 10th board meeting was not on anybody's calendar and we have found a date that works for everybody. I think we're going to have one board member out of country, but will be trying to join us. We have other ones that had other commitments, but are trying to join us for part of the day. And so to bring everybody together in that conversation, we had made the decision to go to a virtual setting. We are trying to move back to a broader, I think, in-person meeting overall with our board meetings. So that is our plan moving forward. And as I said, we'll be meeting one-on-one with all of the FTLAC members and for that. So the meeting also will be on YouTube, on our ODF channel of YouTube, so that folks that aren't participating will be able to watch that and to go back and watch it later if they've missed it or any of that kind of thing. So that's the outline of what we are planning for May 10th.
Thank you for that, Kate. I appreciate it very much. I do. And,
Okay.
And again, to ODF staff, you know, I just we do appreciate you guys so much. You guys are doing great work. You are. But that there are issues that we have, and we're not going to agree on all issues. I think we already all know that. But please understand that this is nothing personal. You have a job to do, just like the commissioners have a job to do in all of our individual counties. And to us, it's protecting the life, health, safety, and the essential services that these counties have to provide to our residents. We do that in large extent with timber dollars. So when we see things coming down the line that are not conducive to our budgets and things of that nature, we get a little riled up sometimes. And I hope you understand that. So do we have anything else? Anyone want to weigh in here before we call this quits?
I had a couple small things I wanted to check in with everybody, if that's okay.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, David. So one piece of it is because we've kind of put in these special meetings, we've gotten a little off schedule. So we'll be talking with Commissioner Yamamoto and Commissioner Sweet about the next one on all of your schedules is May 13th. And so we'll just have to get together and talk about what that looks like and what that agenda would even be if we still have that meeting. So we'll talk about that. The other last piece on my agenda is this is my last day as division chief for State Forest. And I want to provide the announcement that Mike Wilson has been selected as the permanent State Forest chief in this position. So congratulations, Mike. You'll do great.
Congratulations, Mike. You're jumping into the hot seat here, you know.
I guess so. Thanks. I appreciate that. And I just want to say thanks to Kate. She's really done a heck of a job as interim, hit the ground running. And, this wasn't just, we knew from the get-go that we needed somebody as an interim who wasn't just going to check boxes and keep a seat warm. And she's done a great job moving things forward. I'm really going to miss her, quite frankly. But thank you, Kate.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks, everybody. I will be the Tillamook DF again here on Monday.
Well, see, and that's what I'm looking forward to, having Kate back in Tillamook County. Kate, we missed you, although, I think we've talked more than ever since you made that move.
Absolutely. Thanks.
But it's going to be great to have you back. And Michael, looking forward to working with you. Again, I want to thank everyone for being on the call today. Anything else from anyone? Great. With that, time being 4:23 p.m., we will adjourn this FTLAC meeting. Thank you, everyone, for being here today.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.